Imani moved through the mirrored halls of the harem, a ghost in a gilded cage. Lanterns cast flickering light on the intricate tilework, but no amount of splendor could dispel the shadow that clung to her. She was a dancer, lithe and graceful, her movements as fluid as the desert wind, yet in the eyes of the other women she was nothing more than the daughter of a traitor. Her father, the court musician, had been executed for treason years ago, his name a stain on her family's honor. The harem, once a place of beauty and artistry, had become her prison. Every whispered conversation, every sidelong glance was a reminder of her disgrace. The silks and jewels that adorned her felt like chains. The other women, adorned in finery and vying for the sultan's attention, treated her with a mixture of pity and contempt. They saw her as a fallen star, a reminder that even in this palace of dreams, fortune could turn in an instant. Farika, the chief concubine, ruled the harem with an iron fist. She was a woman of sharp beauty and even sharper words. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, missed nothing. She delighted in reminding Imani of her father's alleged crimes, using every opportunity to humiliate her. Such a pity, she would purr, her voice dripping with false sympathy, that such talent should be tainted by such a shameful legacy. Imani endured it all with quiet dignity. She held her head high, her gaze steady. She found solace in her dance, pouring her sorrow and defiance into every movement. In the mirrored halls, she danced for herself, for her lost father, and for the faint hope that one day the shadow of disgrace would lift. She knew the whispers followed her, the judgment hung heavy in the air, but she refused to break. She would not let their cruelty dim the fire within her. She would dance, and she would survive. Prince Omar, heir to the Sultanate, moved through the shadowed corridors of the palace, his face hidden behind a simple wooden mask. His usual attire of rich silks and jewels was replaced by plain, dark robes. He was a man of duty, trained in swordplay and statecraft, his days filled with the weighty responsibilities of his future reign. Yet, beneath his stoic exterior beat a heart drawn to the beauty and artistry of the harem's dancers. He often sought refuge from the pressures of court in these secret visits, drawn by the music and the graceful movements that offered a fleeting escape. Tonight, a special celebration was being held in the harem. Lanterns blazed, casting a warm glow on the elaborate decorations. The air buzzed with anticipation. Omar found a secluded spot behind a carved wooden screen, his presence unknown to the assembled women. He watched as the dancers took their places, their colorful costumes shimmering in the light. His gaze was drawn to one figure in particular, Imani. He had noticed her before, her quiet grace and the haunting sadness in her eyes setting her apart from the others. There was a strength in her movements, a resilience that intrigued him. The music began, a lively melody that filled the air. The dancers moved with practiced precision, their bodies swaying like reeds in the wind. Imani, however, seemed to possess a different kind of magic. Her movements were fluid and expressive, telling a story of both sorrow and defiance. Omar watched, captivated, as she danced, his hand resting on the hilt of his hidden dagger, gesture of unconscious comfort in this unfamiliar setting. Suddenly, disaster struck. As Imani spun, her costume, elaborately adorned with beads and sequins, ripped apart. The other dancers gasped, some stifling laughter. Farika, her face a mask of malicious satisfaction, watched from the sidelines. It was clear to Omar that the mishap was no accident. He saw the frayed threads, the evidence of deliberate sabotage. Imani stumbled, her face flushed with shame. For a moment she seemed frozen, caught in the spotlight of humiliation. Then something remarkable happened. Instead of retreating in tears, she straightened her back, her eyes flashing with defiance. She gathered the remnants of her costume around her and, with a deep breath, began to improvise. She transformed the mishap into an act of breathtaking beauty, her movements now infused with a raw emotion that transcended the carefully choreographed performance. The music swelled, and Imani danced as if possessed, her spirit soaring above. The whispers and the stares, the other dancers initially stunned, were now captivated. Even Farika seemed momentarily speechless. The room fell silent, save for the music and the soft rustle of Imani's improvised costume. When the music finally ended, a collective gasp filled the air. Then applause erupted, hesitant at first, then growing into a thunderous ovation. Omar, hidden behind the screen, felt a surge of admiration. He removed his mask, his face illuminated by the lantern light. He stepped out from behind the screen, and in full view of the assembled court, knelt before Imani. The silence that followed Omar's gesture was thick with shock. The women of the harem, accustomed to the prince's masked anonymity, stared in disbelief. Farika's face was a thundercloud. Imani, still flushed from her performance, looked at the kneeling prince with wide, startled eyes. The music had stopped. The lanterns seemed to burn brighter, and the air crackled with tension. Omar rose slowly, his gaze fixed on Imani. He said nothing, but the admiration in his eyes spoke volumes. He turned, and with a regal nod, disappeared back into the shadows of the palace. The whispers began the moment he was gone, rippling through the harem like a sudden breeze. The women, forgetting their earlier mockery, now buzzed with speculation. Imani, the daughter of a traitor, had captured the attention of the heir to the throne. The next day, the harem was abuzz. Imani moved through the halls, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. The whispers followed her, no longer laced with contempt, but with a new kind of curiosity, a mixture of envy and awe. Farika's gaze, however, was colder than ever. She watched Imani with an intensity that made her skin crawl. During the afternoon's dance practice, Imani found herself constantly glancing towards the screened balcony where Omar had stood the night before. She couldn't shake the image of him kneeling, his face illuminated by the lantern light. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. As she practiced a particularly difficult sequence, she caught a glimpse of movement behind the screen. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be him? She risked a quick glance and saw a flash of dark robes disappearing behind the carved wood. A small, hopeful smile touched her lips. Later that evening, as Imani walked through the courtyard, she heard the soft rustle of silk behind her. She turned and found Omar standing there, his face unmasked, his eyes filled with a warmth she had never seen before. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that sent a shiver down her spine. "Your dance," he said, his voice low and gentle. "What breathtaking!" Imani lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushing. "Your Highness," she murmured, unsure what else to say. "Please," he said, stepping closer, "call me Omar." He paused, searching her face. I need to speak with you." Imani looked up, her heart pounding. She knew this was dangerous, that their stolen glances and whispered conversations could have serious consequences. But in that moment, looking into his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to care. The forbidden courtyard, hidden behind high walls and guarded by ancient fig trees, became their sanctuary. Peacocks roamed freely amongst the fragrant jasmine bushes, their iridescent feathers shimmering in the dappled sunlight. It was here, away from the prying eyes of the harem and the court, that Omar and Imani truly began to know each other. Their meetings were brief, stolen moments snatched between duties and routines. Omar would slip away from his lessons in statecraft and swordplay, drawn by the promise of Imani's company. Imani, in turn, would find excuses to leave the stifling atmosphere of the harem, her heart yearning for the brief respite that Omar's presence provided. They spoke of their dreams and their fears, their voices hushed and intimate in the quiet courtyard. Omar confessed the burden of his future responsibilities, the weight of the crown he was destined to wear. He spoke of the endless political maneuvering, the constant pressure to marry a foreign princess for the sake of alliances and power. He confided in Imani his yearning for a simpler life, a life where he could choose his own path, his own love. Imani, in turn, shared the pain of her father's disgrace, the constant humiliation she endured in the harem. She spoke of her passion for dance, the way it allowed her to express the emotions she couldn't voice aloud. She told him of her dreams of a world where art was celebrated, not confined within the gilded cage of the palace. With each stolen meeting, their bond deepened. They found solace in each other's company, a shared understanding that transcended the differences in their stations. Omar saw in Imani a strength and resilience that he admired, a spirit that refused to be broken by adversity. Imani saw in Omar a gentleness and kindness that belied his stoic exterior, a heart that yearned for connection and love. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the shade of a fig tree, Omar reached out and took Imani's hand. His touch was gentle, yet firm. He looked into her eyes, his gaze filled with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Imani," he whispered, I find myself drawn to you in a way I cannot explain." Imani looked down at their clasped hands, her heart pounding. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she recognized as hope. She knew their path was fraught with danger, that their love was forbidden. But in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the courtyard and the warmth of Omar's touch, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, their love could overcome the obstacles that stood in their way. The stolen moments in the forbidden courtyard could not remain secret forever. The hushed whispers that had followed Imani since Omar's public gesture now grew louder, spreading beyond the confines of the harem and into the corridors of power. The court, always eager for gossip, buzzed with speculation about the prince and the disgraced dancer. Farika, her eyes burning with resentment, watched the growing closeness between Omar and Imani with increasing alarm. She knew that Omar's ascension to the throne was imminent, and she feared losing the power and influence she had cultivated over the years. Any woman who captured Omar's attention was a threat, but Imani, with her tainted lineage and captivating spirit, posed a particular danger. Farika began to subtly poison the minds of the other concubines, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion. She hinted at Imani's ambition, suggesting that she was using Omar to elevate her own status, to escape the shadow of her father's disgrace. The whispers, once fueled by curiosity, now took on a sharper edge, tinged with envy and malice. Omar, too, felt the pressure mounting. His advisors, concerned about the potential scandal and the political ramifications of his interest in Imani, began to voice their disapproval. They reminded him of his duty to the kingdom, the importance of marrying a princess from a powerful neighboring nation. They warned him that his infatuation with a disgraced dancer could jeopardize his future reign, weaken his authority, and undermine the stability of the Sultanate. The weight of their words settled heavily on Omar's shoulders. He knew they spoke the truth, that his duty to his people came first. But his heart ached for Imani, for the stolen moments of joy and connection they shared in the forbidden courtyard. He found himself torn between the demands of his position and the desires of his heart, a conflict that threatened to tear him apart. The air in the palace grew thick with tension, the whispers of scandal swirling like a gathering storm. The stolen glances between Omar and Imani became more furtive, their meetings in the courtyard shorter and more infrequent. The shadow of disapproval hung over them, a constant reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. The carefree days of their budding romance were over, replaced by a growing sense of foreboding, a premonition that the storm was about to break. Farika summoned Imani to her private chambers, a room of opulent silks and heavy perfumes. The air hung thick with unspoken tension. Imani entered, her head held high, but her heart pounded against her ribs. She knew this confrontation was inevitable, the culmination of Farika's simmering resentment. Farika dismissed her attendants with a flick of her wrist, leaving her alone with Imani. She rose from her elaborately carved chair, her movements fluid and predatory, like a serpent preparing to strike. "You have grown bold, Imani," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "Too bold for your own good." Imani met her gaze unflinchingly. "I have done nothing wrong," she replied, her voice steady. "Nothing wrong?" Farika laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You have ensnared the prince, the heir to the throne. You, the daughter of a traitor, dare to aspire to such heights?" "My father was falsely accused," Imani said, her voice trembling slightly, "and my feelings for Prince Omar are my own affair." "Your feelings?" Farika's eyes narrowed. "You think you can seduce your way to power? You think you can use the prince to escape the shadow of your disgrace?" Imani's patience snapped. "I am not using anyone," she retorted, her voice rising. "My love for Omar is genuine, unlike the games you play." Farika's face contorted with rage. "You dare to speak to me in such a manner?" she shrieked. "I will crush you like an insect." She moved towards Imani, her hand raised as if to strike. Imani stood her ground, refusing to cower. Farika, seeing the defiance in Imani's eyes, hesitated. She lowered her hand, her anger replaced by a cold, calculating malice. "You may think you have won the prince's favor," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "But I assure you, this is only the beginning. I will not allow you to ruin everything I have worked for. I will expose you for the manipulative little serpent you are." From that day forward, Farika's persecution of Imani intensified. She used her influence to restrict Imani's movements, confining her to the harem and forbidding her from attending any further performances. She spread rumors about Imani's supposed scheming, poisoning the minds of the other women and turning them against her. She even intercepted messages between Imani and Omar, ensuring that their communication was severed. Imani found herself increasingly isolated, trapped within the gilded cage of the harem, the walls closing in around her. The whispers and stares of the other women, once again laced with contempt, followed her like shadows. The hope that had blossomed in the forbidden courtyard began to wither, replaced by a Omar paced the length of his private chambers, the weight of the Sultanate pressing heavily on his shoulders. His advisors had been relentless, their voices echoing in his mind, urging him to fulfill his duty, to secure a politically advantageous marriage. Princess Amara of the neighboring kingdom of Eldoria was their preferred choice. Beautiful, intelligent, and from a powerful family. An alliance with Eldoria would strengthen the Sultanate, securing trade routes and solidifying their defenses. It was a logical choice, a strategic necessity, yet Omar's heart remained captive in the forbidden courtyard with Imani. He recalled her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled in the dappled sunlight, the gentle touch of her hand in his. He remembered the stories they shared, the dreams they whispered beneath the ancient fig trees. The thought of marrying another, of pledging his life to someone he did not love, filled him with a profound sense of emptiness. He knew his advisors were right, that his duty to his people came first. He understood the importance of stability, of securing the future of his kingdom, but the thought of sacrificing his own happiness, of condemning himself to a life devoid of love, was a burden he struggled to bear. He tried to reason with himself, to convince himself that duty must prevail over desire. He told himself that Imani's lineage, tainted by her father's alleged treason, made their union impossible. He reminded himself of the scandal their relationship would cause, the damage it could inflict on the already fragile political landscape. But even as he recited these logical arguments, the image of Imani's face, etched with sorrow and defiance, haunted his thoughts. He remembered the fire in her eyes, the strength in her spirit, the way she had transformed humiliation into an act of breathtaking beauty. He knew that a life without her, a life bound by duty and devoid of love, would be a hollow existence. He stopped pacing, his gaze settling on the ornate sword that hung on the wall, a symbol of his power and responsibility. He reached out and touched the cool steel, feeling the weight of his destiny in his hand. He had a choice to make, a choice that would determine not only his own future, but the future of his kingdom. He could choose the path of duty, the path of logic and political expediency. Or he could choose the path of his heart, the path that led to Imani, the path that promised love and happiness, but also uncertainty and danger. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, heavy as the crown he was destined to wear. A royal decree was issued, swift and unexpected. Prince Omar was to embark on a diplomatic mission to the kingdom of Eldoria. The official reason was to strengthen ties between the two nations, but the whispers in the palace hinted at a different motive: to distance Omar from Imani and pave the way for his marriage to Princess Amara. The news struck Imani like a physical blow. The stolen glances, the whispered words in the forbidden courtyard, the fragile hope that had blossomed between them. It all seemed to crumble in an instant. She felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach, a premonition of the loneliness that awaited her. Omar sought her out before his departure, their meeting brief and bittersweet. They met in the shadows of the palace gardens, hidden from prying eyes. He held her close, his embrace tight and desperate. "I have to go, Imani," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise, I will return." Imani clung. To him, her tears soaking his robes. She knew his promise was fragile, easily broken by the pressures of court and the machinations of those who sought to keep them apart. She wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope of their reunion, but despair gnawed at her heart. "Don't forget me, Omar," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Never," he replied, his voice hoarse. He kissed her forehead, a tender gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. Then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving Imani alone in the darkness. The days that followed were bleak and empty. Farika, emboldened by Omar's absence, intensified her campaign against Imani. Rumors of her supposed treachery and manipulation spread like wildfire through the harem. The other women, fueled by Farika's venomous whispers, shunned her completely. Imani found herself utterly alone, isolated and ostracized, the weight of her father's disgrace and the loss of Omar crushing her spirit. Then the final blow fell. A decree was issued, stripping Imani of her position as a dancer and expelling her from the harem. She was to be sent to the far reaches of the Sultanate, to a life of servitude and obscurity. All hope seemed lost. The world, once filled with the promise of love and happiness, had become a desolate wasteland. Imani, stripped of everything she held dear, was left with nothing but the bitter taste of despair. The decree of expulsion hung over Imani like a sword, poised to sever her last. Remaining ties to the palace, to the memory of Omar, to any hope of a future beyond servitude and obscurity. But as the initial shock wore off, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She would not accept this fate. She would not be broken. She would not let Farika win. The injustice of her situation burned within her, fueling a newfound resolve. Her father had been branded a traitor, his name tarnished, his life stolen. She had been humiliated, ostracized, and now cast aside like a discarded trinket. But what if the accusations against her father were false? What if the whispers of treason were nothing more than lies, carefully crafted to destroy her family? Seed of rebellion took root in her heart, growing stronger with each passing day. She would not be silenced, she would not be banished. She would fight for her father's honor, for her own future, for the truth that had been buried beneath layers of deceit and manipulation. She began to ask questions, cautiously at first, testing the waters. She sought out the older servants, the ones who had been in the palace for years, the ones who might remember the events surrounding her father's execution. She listened intently to their stories, searching for any inconsistencies, any hints of doubt, any whispers of conspiracy. Most were hesitant to speak, their fear of Farika's wrath palpable. They offered platitudes, vague recollections, and averted gazes, but Imani persisted, her quiet determination unwavering. She knew the truth was out there, hidden somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, buried beneath years of silence and fear. One evening, as she helped an elderly servant named Zara prepare the evening meal, Imani cautiously broached the subject of her father. Zara, her face etched with wrinkles and wisdom, listened patiently as Imani spoke of her, doubts her suspicions. When Imani finished, Zara sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of unspoken secrets. "Child," she said, her voice low and gentle, "there are things that happen within these walls that never see the light of day, things that are best left undisturbed." Imani looked at Zara, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "But what if those things are lies?" she asked. "What if innocent people are condemned because of those lies?" Zara's gaze softened. She looked at Imani, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "There are some truths," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that are dangerous to uncover. But sometimes," she added, a hint of steel entering her voice, "the most dangerous truths are the ones that need to be told." A spark of hope ignited in Imani's chest. She had found an ally, someone who was willing to help her uncover the truth no matter the cost. The seed of rebellion that had taken root in her heart began to blossom, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose and the unwavering belief that justice, no matter how long delayed, would eventually prevail. Zara, the elderly servant, became Imani's confidant and guide in her quest for the truth. Their meetings took place in the quiet hours. Before dawn, in a small, forgotten storeroom tucked away in a remote corner of the harem. Surrounded by dusty tapestries and discarded furniture, they whispered their plans, their voices hushed and conspiratorial. Zara had served in the palace for decades, witnessing the rise and fall of countless favorites, the intrigues and betrayals that played out behind the gilded facade. She possessed a wealth of knowledge, a keen understanding of the palace's hidden currents and unspoken rules. She knew where to look, who to question, and how to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. "Your father was a good man, Imani," Zara said one morning, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "A kind man, a talented musician. He did not deserve his fate, I know," Imani replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "But how do we prove his innocence? How do we uncover the truth after all these years?" Zara's eyes gleamed with a shrewd intelligence. "There are records," she said. "Old documents, letters, decrees. They are kept in the royal archives, locked away and forgotten. If we can find them, we may find the evidence we need." The royal archives were heavily guarded, accessible only to a select few. But Zara, with her years of service and her network of contacts within the palace, knew how to circumvent the rules. She instructed Imani on how to gain access to the archives, how to blend in with the other servants, how to move unseen through the shadowed corridors. Their plan was risky, fraught with danger. If they were discovered, the consequences would be severe. But Imani was determined to press forward, driven by the unwavering belief that the truth was worth fighting for. Night after night, Imani slipped away from the harem, following Zara's instructions. She moved through the darkened corridors of the palace, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses heightened. She learned to navigate the labyrinthine hallways, to anticipate the movements of the guards, to blend into the shadows like a ghost. Archives were a vast, cavernous space filled with rows upon rows of dusty shelves and ancient scrolls. The air was thick with the smell of parchment and decay. Imani, guided by Zara's whispered instructions, searched through the countless documents, her fingers tracing the faded ink, her eyes scanning the archaic script. Days turned into weeks, and still they found nothing. Imani's hope began to dwindle, replaced by a gnawing sense of despair. Perhaps the truth was lost forever, buried beneath layers of time and deceit. Then one night, as she was about to give up, her hand brushed against a small hidden compartment behind one of the shelves. She reached inside and pulled out a small, leather-bound box. Her heart pounded in her chest as she opened the lid. Inside, nestled amongst layers of silk, were a bundle of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. As she began to read, her blood ran cold. The letters, written in Farika's own hand, revealed a web of lies and betrayal that reached the highest levels of the court. They proved not only her father's innocence, but also Farika's complicity in his downfall, her treasonous dealings with a rival nation, and her desperate bid for power. Imani clutched the letters to her chest, her body trembling with a mixture of shock and triumph. She had found the truth, the evidence she needed to clear her father's name and expose Farika's treachery. The seed of rebellion had blossomed into a flame that threatened to consume the lies and deceit that had shrouded the palace for so long. Omar returned to the palace, the dust of the Eldorian roads clinging to his boots and the weight of his unresolved feelings for Imani heavy on his heart. The diplomatic mission had been a success, strengthening ties between the two kingdoms and paving the way for a potential alliance. Yet the diplomatic niceties and political maneuvering had felt like a charade, a distraction from the true matters, and that occupied his thoughts. He had carried Imani's image with him throughout his journey, her face a constant presence in his mind. He remembered the warmth of her smile, the fire in her eyes, the strength of her spirit. The thought of marrying Princess Amara, of fulfilling his duty at the expense of his own happiness, filled him with a growing sense of unease. He had written to Imani countless times during his absence, pouring out his heart in each letter, assuring her of his unwavering love. But he had received no reply. The silence had gnawed at him, fueling his anxiety and deepening his fears. Had Farika intercepted his letters? Had she succeeded in turning Imani against him? The moment he stepped foot inside the palace walls, he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The usual bustle of court life seemed subdued, the air thick with tension. The whispers that had followed him before his departure had intensified, now laced with a new element of speculation and intrigue. He sought out his advisors, demanding news of Imani. They offered vague assurances, telling him that she was well, that she was simply adjusting to her new role within the harem. But their averted gazes and hesitant responses only deepened his suspicions. He knew something was wrong, something they were hiding from him. He dismissed his advisors and immediately set out to find Imani. He searched the harem, his heart pounding with each empty room, each unanswered call. He questioned the servants, but they offered little help, their faces masked with fear and uncertainty. Finally, he found Zara, the elderly servant who had always shown Imani kindness. Zara, seeing the desperation in Omar's eyes, hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Your Highness," she said, her voice low and urgent, "Imani is gone. She has been expelled from the harem." Omar's blood ran cold. Expelled, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Why? What happened? Zara explained. The rumors of Imani's supposed scheming, the accusations of manipulation and treachery, the decree that had banished her from the palace. As he listened, a cold fury began to build within him. He knew these accusations were false, that Imani was innocent. He recognized Farika's hand in this, her venomous plot to destroy the woman he loved. He turned to Zara, his eyes blazing with determination. "Where has she been sent?" he demanded. Zara hesitated, then revealed the location of Imani's exile, a remote village on the outskirts of the Sultanate. Omar, without a word, turned and strode out of the harem, his mind racing, his heart filled with a fierce resolve. He would find Imani, he would clear her name, and he would expose Farika's treachery, no matter the cost. He would not rest until justice was served and Imani was restored to her rightful place by his side. Imani carefully untied the faded ribbon binding the letters, her hands trembling. The parchment felt brittle and dry, the ink faded, but still legible. As she read, a chilling realization washed over her. Farika, the woman who had tormented her for years, the letters detailed Farika's clandestine dealings with a rival nation, her promises of information and influence in exchange for gold and power. They revealed her meticulous plan to undermine the Sultan's authority, to sow discord within the court, and to position herself as the true power behind the throne. One letter, chilling in its casual cruelty, detailed how she had framed Imani's father for treason, silencing him before he could expose her own treacherous activities. Imani's heart ached for her father, for the injustice he had suffered, for the years of shame and disgrace she had endured. But alongside the grief, a fierce determination hardened her resolve. She would expose Farika. She would clear her father's name, and she would bring the traitor to justice. Meanwhile, Omar, driven by his unwavering love for Imani and his growing suspicions about Farika, had launched his own investigation. He discreetly questioned his father's most trusted advisors, seeking any information that could shed light on the events surrounding Imani's father's execution. He pored over old court records, searching for inconsistencies, for any hint of foul play. His efforts were not in vain. He uncovered a series of financial transactions hidden within the complex web of palace accounts that linked Farika to the rival nation mentioned in Imani's letters. He found records of secret meetings, coded messages, and clandestine exchanges of information. The evidence, though circumstantial, was damning. It painted a clear picture of Farika's treachery, her betrayal of the Sultan, and her ruthless ambition. Omar and Imani, each pursuing their own lines of inquiry, unknowingly converged on the same devastating truth. Imani, armed with Farika's incriminating letters, sought out Zara, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Zara, upon reading the letters, gasped in disbelief. "This is treason," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "This could bring down the entire court." "We have to tell the Sultan," Imani said, her voice firm. At that very moment, Omar burst into the storeroom, his face pale with urgency. "Imani," he said, his voice breathless, "I have found proof. Farika is a traitor." He revealed the evidence he had uncovered, the financial records, the coded messages, the web of deceit that Farika had so carefully woven. As he spoke, Imani produced the letters, their contents mirroring and corroborating Omar's findings. The two sets of evidence, discovered independently, intertwined to form an undeniable indictment of Farika's treachery. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with a mixture of relief and dread. They had unmasked the truth, but the path ahead was fraught with danger. Farika was powerful, cunning, and ruthless. She would not go down without a fight. They knew they had to act quickly, before she could further her treacherous plans and plunge the Sultanate into chaos. Omar, Imani, and Zara sought an immediate audience with the Sultan. The weight of their discovery pressed heavily upon them. The knowledge of Farika's treachery, a burning secret that demanded to be revealed. The Sultan, a wise but aging ruler, greeted them with a gentle smile, unaware of the storm that was about to erupt within his palace walls. Omar, his voice trembling slightly, stepped forward. "Father," he began, "we have discovered something that you must know." He laid out the evidence piece by piece, the financial records, the coded messages, the web of deceit that pointed unequivocally to Farika's betrayal. Imani then presented the letters, written in Farika's own hand, detailing her treasonous dealings and her role in framing Imani's father. The Sultan listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. When they finished, he sat in stunned silence, the weight of the betrayal heavy upon him. He looked at Omar, then at Imani, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. This is a grave accusation," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you certain of these claims?" "We have proof, father," Omar replied, his voice firm. The Sultan nodded slowly. "Then we must confront Farika," he said, his voice regaining its strength. "She must answer for these crimes." Farika was summoned to the Sultan's private chambers. She entered with her usual air of confidence, her head held high, her eyes flashing with a cold intelligence. But as she saw Omar and Imani standing beside the Sultan, a flicker of unease crossed her face. The Sultan, his voice heavy with disappointment, recounted the evidence against her, the proof of her treachery and deceit. As he spoke, Farika's composure began to crumble. The color drained from her face, her eyes darted nervously around the room, and her hands trembled slightly. When the Sultan finished, Farika burst into a torrent of denials and accusations. She claimed that the evidence was fabricated, that Omar and Imani were conspiring against her, that they were jealous of her power and influence. She spun a web of lies, attempting to deflect the blame and cast doubt on their accusations, but the evidence was too strong, too compelling. The Sultan, his heart heavy with sorrow, saw through her charade. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that Farika was guilty. "You have betrayed my trust," he said, his voice filled with a quiet anger. "You have betrayed the Sultanate. You have brought shame upon this palace." Farika, seeing that her lies were failing, her mask of composure shattered. Her eyes flashed with a venomous rage. "You fools!" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can defeat me? I am more powerful than you know." She backed away, her hand reaching inside the folds of her robe. She pulled out a small vial filled with a clear, colorless liquid. "You may have won this battle," she said, her voice laced with a chilling triumph, "but you will not win the war." She raised the vial to her lips, a cruel smile twisting her face. "This," she said, her gaze fixed on the Sultan, "is for you." Imani's mind raced. She recognized the vial, the subtle scent of bitter almonds clinging to the air. Poison. Farika intended to kill the Sultan. Before anyone could react, Imani lunged forward, her hand striking Farika's wrist. The vial flew across the room, shattering against the marble floor. The pungent aroma of almonds filled the air, a chilling reminder of the danger they had narrowly avoided. Farika, her face contorted with rage, lunged at Imani, her fingers clawing at her face. Omar stepped between them, shielding Imani from Farika's attack. Guards, alerted by the commotion, rushed into the room, seizing Farika and restraining her. The Sultan, shaken but unharmed, watched the scene unfold, his eyes wide with shock. "Take her away," he commanded, his voice trembling with anger. As the guards dragged Farika from the room, her screams echoing through the palace, Imani realized the gravity of the situation. The poison, though spilled, had released its deadly fumes. The Sultan, though not directly exposed, had inhaled enough of the toxic air to be affected. He swayed slightly, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Father!" Omar cried, rushing to his side. "Get the royal physician!" Imani shouted to the guards, her voice laced with urgency. "Quickly!" The guards hurried away, leaving Omar and Imani alone with the ailing Sultan. Imani knew that time was of the essence. The poison, though not immediately lethal, would quickly weaken the Sultan, leaving him vulnerable to further complications. They had to act fast, before it was too late. Remembering a remedy her grandmother, a skilled healer, had once taught her, Imani searched the room frantically for ingredients. She found a bowl of dates, some crushed almonds, and a pitcher of water. Working quickly, she mixed the ingredients, together creating a thick paste. "Father," she said, gently supporting his head, "you must eat this." The Sultan, his breathing labored, weakly opened his mouth. Imani carefully fed him the paste, praying that it would work, that it would counteract the effects of the poison. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited for the royal physician to arrive. Omar paced the room, his face etched with worry, while Imani held the Sultan's hand, whispering words of comfort and encouragement. Finally, the royal physician arrived, his face grim. He examined the Sultan, his brow furrowed in concentration. He asked questions about the poison, the symptoms, the remedy Imani had administered. Imani answered truthfully, her heart pounding with anxiety. The physician then administered a series of treatments, his movements swift and precise. He worked tirelessly, his focus unwavering, his every action a battle against the encroaching darkness. As the hours passed, the Sultan's breathing gradually became more regular, the color returned to his face, and the strength slowly seeped back into his limbs. The crisis had passed. The Sultan, thanks to Imani's quick thinking and the royal physician's skill, had survived Farika's venomous attack. But the danger was not entirely over. The palace was in turmoil, the court buzzing with rumors of the attempted assassination. Farika's treachery had been exposed, but the repercussions of her actions were still unfolding, threatening to destabilize the Sultanate and plunge the kingdom into chaos. The dawn broke over the palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The air, usually filled with the songs of birds and the gentle murmur of fountains, was thick with tension. News of Farika's attempted assassination of the Sultan had spread like wildfire through the court, leaving a trail of shock and disbelief in its wake. The Sultan, though weakened by the ordeal, had recovered enough to preside over the hastily convened court. He sat on his throne, his face pale but resolute, his eyes burning with a quiet anger. The courtiers, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity, whispered amongst themselves, their usual chatter replaced by hushed speculation. Farika was brought before the court, her hands bound, her head bowed. The defiance that had blazed in her eyes the night before was gone, replaced by a dull resignation. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The financial records, the coded messages, the incriminating letters, and the testimony of Omar and Imani. The Sultan, his voice clear and strong, recounted Farika's crimes, her treachery, her deceit, her attempt to poison him and seize power. He spoke of the damage she had inflicted on the Sultanate, the discord she had sown within the court, the injustice she had inflicted upon Imani and her father. Farika, her spirit broken, offered no defense. She stood silently before the court, her head bowed, her fate sealed. The Sultan, his voice heavy with sorrow, pronounced his judgment. Farika was stripped of her title, her privileges, and her possessions. She was banished from the Sultanate, condemned to a life of exile in the desolate lands beyond the kingdom's borders. She was never to set foot within the palace walls again. A collective gasp rippled through the court as the guards led Farika away, her footsteps echoing through the silent halls. The reign of the serpent, the woman who had ruled the harem with an iron fist, had finally come to an end. The Sultan then turned to Imani, his gaze softening. He spoke of her bravery, her quick thinking, her loyalty to the Sultanate. He acknowledged the injustice she and her father had suffered, the years of shame and disgrace they had endured. With a wave of his hand, he declared Imani's father's name cleared, his honor restored. He acknowledged that the accusations of treason had been fabricated, a cruel lie perpetrated by Farika to silence a man who threatened to expose her own treacherous activities. A wave of relief washed over Imani, tears streaming down her face. Her father's name, once a stain on her family's honor, was finally cleansed. The shadow of disgrace that had clung to her for so long finally lifted. The Sultan then addressed the court, his voice filled with a newfound strength. He spoke of the importance of justice, of truth, and of loyalty. He vowed to restore order to the Sultanate, to root out corruption, and to ensure that such injustice would never again occur within his palace walls. As the court dispersed, a sense of hope filled the air. Farika's reign of terror was over, and a new era, an era of justice and truth, was about to begin. Imani, her heart filled with gratitude and a newfound sense of purpose, knew that her journey was far from over. She had much work to do, much healing to undertake, but she knew with a certainty that warmed her soul that she was no longer alone. She had Omar by her side, and together they would face the future hand in hand, their love a beacon of hope in the newly dawning day. The forbidden courtyard, once a sanctuary for stolen glances and whispered secrets, was transformed. Garlands of fragrant jasmine and vibrant bougainvillea adorned the ancient fig trees. Lanterns, painted with intricate designs, cast a warm glow on the meticulously manicured lawns. Peacocks, their iridescent feathers shimmering in the sunlight, strutted proudly amongst the guests, their calls echoing through the air. Today, the courtyard was a place of celebration, a testament to the enduring power of love and the triumph of justice. Omar, dressed in robes of shimmering gold, stood before the assembled court, his face radiant with happiness. He looked at Imani, her beauty enhanced by the simple elegance of her wedding attire. The shadow of disgrace that had once clung to her was gone, replaced by a radiant aura of strength and grace. He took her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "Imani," he said, his voice clear and strong, "before this court, before my father, and before all who have witnessed our journey, I ask you to be my wife." Imani's heart swelled with emotion. Tears of joy welled in her eyes as she looked at Omar, the man who had stood by her, the man who had believed in her, the man who had fought. "For her love, yes," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "1,000 times yes." The Sultan, his face beaming with pride, rose from his throne. He blessed their union, his voice filled with warmth and affection. He spoke of the strength of their love, the resilience of their spirits, and the hope they represented for the future of the Sultanate. The courtyard erupted in cheers as Omar placed a delicate gold ring, adorned with a single perfect pearl, on Imani's finger. They embraced, their love a beacon of hope in the bright sunlight. The wedding celebration was a joyous affair, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Imani, now a princess, moved through the crowd with grace and confidence, her eyes sparkling with happiness. She greeted the guests, her warmth and kindness touching everyone she encountered. She had transformed from a humiliated dancer, ostracized and scorned, to a beloved princess, admired and respected by all. In the days that followed, Imani used her newfound influence to enact meaningful change within the harem. She established a school for the arts, providing young women with the opportunity to develop their talents and pursue their passions. She ensured that no dancer would ever again suffer the humiliation and injustice she had endured. She became a patron of the arts, supporting artists and musicians, fostering a vibrant cultural scene within the palace walls. Omar, now the Sultan, ruled with wisdom and compassion, guided by the principles of justice and fairness. He implemented reforms that strengthened the Sultanate, promoting trade, fostering peace, and ensuring the prosperity of his people. Imani and Omar, together, transformed the Sultanate, their love a guiding light, their reign a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. In the evenings, they would often return to the forbidden courtyard, now a symbol of their love and their triumph over adversity. They would sit beneath the ancient fig trees, hand in hand, watching the peacocks dance in the moonlight, their hearts filled with gratitude and love. And so, the tale of the humiliated dancer who captured the heart of a prince ended, not in tragedy or despair, but in a joyous celebration of love, justice, and the enduring beauty of a peacock's dance.